This is Scott Harney from Esoteric Guides. I'm here tonight with Dash Kwiatkowski, who, with their partner, Rosen Escondon, run the Psychic Friendz podcast. The two also do psychic investigations into hauntings in the New York City area. And let me introduce you to Dash. 1 second, I'm going to pin you.
All right, I'll wait to be pinned. Hello.
How's it going, Dash? Yeah,
it's going pretty good.
And we met originally at Witch Fest 2 years ago.
Yeah, Witches Fest.
That was cool.
Went back this last year again. Had a lot of fun. We got bombarded by Christo-fascist protesters. I don't know if you saw about that.
I did see that. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it was a wild scene.
Yeah, that's happening more and more, it appears, in some of these sort of pagan and esoteric events.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
It is unfortunate. It's and they know all the specific laws, so they know if they bring a megaphone, it has to be a very specific decibel, so that legally they can. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, and it's harassing to people. You know, people trying to enjoy themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I know we had an interesting discussion about the Mothman. Did you go to the Mothman festival this year?
You know, I wasn't able to make it out this year. I was caught up doing stuff at home. It's still a very high priority to make it out there. I just designed our second. So we have a Mothman shirt that we like. We just got our second Mothman design that we just put out, and it's a sticker, and it says Moth Madness, and it's a little Macho Man Randy Savage style of the Mothman. And I'm very, very happy with how that one turned out.
Yeah, how does someone go about ordering your Mothman t-shirts? Because my son actually stole mine. So he loved it. I want to get another one. So do you still have some left over? Or?
I absolutely do. So on my Twitter, I tweet the links. They're actually they're sold on my partner's web and art store.
Okay.
I'll run some tweets again, and I'll send some links your way. But on my Twitter, that's @Kwiatkowski. I post all the stuff we have for sale, and I'll probably just put a static link for that in my bio, so people can find it more easily.
Excellent, and I'll put it on the YouTube video as well. That'd be great. Yeah, you have some great merch. I'm telling you.
Thank you.
Stuff. So tell me a little bit about Psychic Friendz. It's a very successful podcast that you and Rosa do, and
so Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit how it started, how it's going, where people can find it.
So it is. It's on every podcast platform. So anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find Psychic Friendz. It is spelled with a Z. It is. I've been sort of lurking on free psychic advice Facebook pages for a long time, just because I find them very funny. I find it very funny that some people get very demanding. A lot of times people will swing in and not read the question and try to jump in with someone will say oh, my kid saw a shape and said it was grandma, but grandma's still alive. And then the whole comment section's flooded with people saying oh, there's life after death. And it's well, yeah, but this grandma's still alive if you read the actual thing. And so I find there's a lot of really, really sort of fun and interesting content. And so the concept of the podcast originally was we're going to go on there and we're going to sort of riff and talk about and do our best to answer some of these questions that maybe aren't getting the best answers and the best help on Psychic Facebook. And really it's just sort of taking off from there. We do different segments. Rosa usually brings different segments where we'll try to divine blind box items or try to determine we'll get the little oils from a botanica and try to determine what does this ointment do just by the smell instead of without seeing it first. So it's a lot of fun. It's it's tongue in cheek. What I feel especially proud about it is it's tongue in cheek. We don't take ourselves too seriously, but at the same time, I'm a strong believer in just about anything. My set of beliefs. I try not to approach the strange or the weird with anything that is feels too religious for me, in that I try not to have a set of beliefs of this is X and this is Y and I know exactly what's going on, because part of the magic and the mystery to me is being I don't know, could be a lot of things. And so as a podcast, we try not to take ourselves too seriously while also trying to be very respectful sort of what could be.
So both you and Rosa are psychics, right? You do tarot?
So I do a lot of tarot. Rosa has premonitory dreams. So Rosa has a lot of Rosa will dream of things and then see that scene happen later on in life. And I always make fun of her because it's always very mundane stuff. It's always it's nothing wild. It's not the lottery numbers. It's someone asking, if someone else has a red pencil or something like that.
Wow.
I do a lot of tarot practice. I've been playing around with a couple of oracle decks that I really like.
Mhm.
In terms of how I would describe my own, abilities, I feel like I'm very tuned into just sort of people. I feel like I'm very tuned into safety and energy of sort of people around me. I don't, the show we tongue in cheek call ourselves psychic. I don't know if you put me on a Ingo Swan card test machine. I don't know how I'm doing. I have been practicing with remote viewing too though, and I've been getting some pretty interesting results.
Mm.
Big fan of Ingo Swan. Queer elder in the paranormal. That's always very important to me. So yeah, I try to dabble in just about everything that I can give a shot to.
Oh, very, very cool. And you're from originally, is it,
I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area
how
originally.
are you? I thought you're
Yeah.
from New York. Okay. But now when did, how long have you been in New York City for?
I got to New York. Ooh, gotta be probably 7 years ago, something like
Okay.
that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I actually, when the pandemic started, so coming up on two, I think around when you met me, we actually moved to Providence. So I'm in New England now.
Oh,
But
okay.
Rosa is in New York, and so when I come to
Okay.
investigate stuff, I always stay in Rosa's extra room, hang
Very
out with
cool.
Rosa's little cat. Yeah.
And how long have you known each other for?
It's funny. Rosa and I, we always joke about being twin flames because of all the ways that our lives sort of intertwine. I met Rosa right when I moved to New York,
Mhm.
and it wasn't until after we met, way after, actually after we started this podcast, even, that we found out we're both from the San Francisco Bay Area. We
Mm.
both had the same exact favorite diner that we used to just hang out at all the time. As kids, we lived in the same apartment complex, and again,
Oh,
we
wow.
wouldn't meet until we were adults.
No,
We
that's
found
something.
that out. I was talking about a jingle from a pet store that I grew up hearing on the TV, and Rose was like, "Oh, I know that one. I know Wet Pet San Pablo." And it was
Wow.
this crazy moment of like, "Oh wow, we really have like been sort of intertwined from the beginning, way before, years before we knew each other."
Wow. Now, in addition to the psychic friends, you do psychic investigations. Um,
Yeah, so we do paranormal investigation stuff. Me and Rosa together. We shot a pilot that is being edited and sort of produced right now. I'm not able to provide details as to the specifics of where people will be able to see it, but if people follow me on social media, I do sort of I talk about it and talk about the production stages as well.
that's great. So, in your experience, do you think the ghosts are sentient creatures or are they just psychic imprints from the past?
I go back and forth on sort of the nature of ghosts. I've read, I would say John Keel and his writing is sort of
Mhm.
predominantly where what I've studied. And John Keel had a lot of thoughts about ghosts being other dimensional beings that are
Mhm.
sort of taken on the shapes of what people imagine them to be and what
Mhm.
people imagine those spirits to look like. John Keel had a lot of, I would say, bordering on paranoid ideas that they're coming to get us and all sorts of silly stuff like that.
I
And
mean, you're
I've
saying trickster spirits? What would you
so
call them?
ultra terrestrials is what is what is
Ultra-terrestrials.
what Mr. Keel I think sort of called them. And he thought this was everything. He thought Bigfoot and UFOs and the Mothman and all that stuff.
Hmm.
And I feel personally that there's too much religious practice from all around the world that believes in contacting the ancestors and ancestral spirits and the beings that we came from. I believe that there's too much of that around the world for none of it to be true, personally. And I think in terms of reflections, in terms of like sort of echoes and memories of people who were once alive, I think that can happen too. I think where I sit is I really believe that magic is all about intention and what you put into it and what you believe in and what you fixate on. And I think that when we're dealing with we're dealing with places that have a lot of energy and sort of energetic memory in them, I think you can get echoes and I think you can get reflections. But I really do believe also that you can get sort of at least versions of people who were there before. And in terms of the Keel ultra terrestrial thing, who's to say if there's not elements of that happening too. One of my most favorite ones to talk about, and this one's interesting because it is potentially apocryphal. Is Keel believed in this place in New York, right, on 12 Gay Street, is a location that Keel genuinely believed was haunted by a fictional character. So Keel believed, so he believed that, so the author, Walter Gibson, who wrote The Shadow, the pulp comic character, lived there. And according to Keel, and he writes about this in the Mothman Prophecies, that location is haunted by the character, the Shadow, this fictional character. And Keel believes having this writer living in this place, creating this character there with all the energy of that man putting it in there, created a tulpa of this character, which then went on to haunt the place.
Wow.
But that's one of my favorite ones, because then at what is even the upper limit of what's possible in that case?
Wow. Almost like a thought form, where
exactly, absolutely.
Or an occultist would create a servitor, maybe, that type of thing.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
And when you go beyond the idea of the individual tulpa into like the greater society idea of like an egregore, right? Then at what point are we saying like, all right, well, if there's a place that's haunted by a specific ghost, how much of that is all of the stories of people saying like there's this ghost there and everyone really truly believing in something being there?
Right.
And the answer is I don't know. And I love that. I get so fascinated by that stuff.
Have you been to 12 Gay Street?
So we've done investigations outside of it. We had a very funny. So I'm a big, strong believer. My favorite flavor of small paranormal incidents is the synchronicity. And a lot of people listening have probably checked out. There's a series called Hellier. Really good, really cool watch. It is on Amazon Prime. Hellier, Hellier. It's a really cool team of Greg and Dana Newkirk. They're a husband and wife team. Greg is an investigator, and Dana, they're both investigators, but Dana does hedge witch stuff. Really cool magic practitioner. And they teamed up with Connor Randall and Carl Pfeiffer, who were the in-house investigators for the Stanley Hotel, which is the hotel that The Shining was based off of.
Oh, right.
So those four get together and really just sort of fall into just a rabbit hole of synchronicities that tie into the Mothman thing. It starts off as a search for goblins in Kentucky, and it's just really a delightful docuseries that I'm a big fan of. But it really illustrates synchronicity as paranormal phenomenon. It's the idea that once you start having little coincidences that I always describe them as things that happen in real life that seem as if they were written in fiction, like little moments that you're like, that's too wild to have just happened. And start lining up. It's a reflection of like maybe something is trying to get your attention, or maybe you're sort of on a path towards something. And so we were coming to New York for my friend Eddie's birthday. It was their birthday, and we decided to come to New York, and there was a bunch of synchronicities leading up there, just sort of like fun, low stakes one. And I was talking to Eddie, and I was like, all right, it's Wednesday night. That's the spooky night. That's the night where the highest rate of paranormal stuff happens, at least again, according to Mr. John Keel. So we're like, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? And I say there's this spot that Keel talks about, and I don't know the street address at this point. I'm like, there's a spot that Keel talks about that's haunted by a fictional character, and I would love to find out like where that is. And Eddie says there's this spot down in the village haunted by flappers. There was a speakeasy, and now there's flappers haunting it. And I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool. Let's look that up. And so we look it up, and that's 12 Gay Street. And I'm saying, all right, cool, 12 Gay Street. And I find a website, and I'm doing some research. I'm reading it, and it has all the stuff about the speakeasy and the flappers. And then I get down to the bottom of the website, and it says, this is the spot that Walter Gibson lived when he wrote The Shadow. And so I had no idea but we're talking about the same spot, both of us. And I'm like, all right, well, that's got to be it. That's got to be the space that we go. And so we go there, and it's locked, and no one lives there, or at least no one lived there when we were there. So we set up outside. We're not going to try to break in or nothing. We set up outside. And what's really funny is we start going, and almost immediately, a haunted tour comes by and starts talking about 12 Gay Street. And all these people are looking at us. We're setting up our little equipment and our gear, and they're thinking, like, are you part of the tour? We're just like, no, we just happen to come, try to do an investigation here while these people happen to go by on a haunted tour. And the wild thing about it, so we like to do what's called the Estes method. I don't know if you're familiar. So it is it's a very specific type of paranormal investigation. It's one of my favorite ones. It was pioneered by Connor and Carl from the Hellier crew while they were working at the Stanley Hotel. And the idea is your spirit box. Mm-hmm. Spirit box, flips through radio frequencies, and you hear words picked by. So the issue though is confirmation bias, right? So if you ask a question, your brain's already looking for an answer. Your brain's looking to hear an answer in the garbage. So the way that the Estes method works is one person puts on a set of isolation headphones and a blindfold, and they plug straight into the spirit box. So they're the only person who can hear the spirit box. And they can't see anything. All they can hear is the radio. Everyone else asks the questions. And so you see the moments where the person asking the questions seemingly gets a response from the person who can't hear the questions being asked.
That's brilliant.
So I really like it. Yeah, again, Connor and Carl figured this out. They pioneered it. I'm a big fan. It's funny because you see it in a lot of ghost shows now. Now that they did it, now everyone's doing it. People don't cite their sources, which I find a little irksome. But that all that said, really, really, really fantastic investigation method. And the wild thing that happened while we were there, we're just sort of like generally asking, is someone here? What's going on? What can we talk to here? And one of my friends who doesn't know anything about anything just came along for fun because I was like, yeah, I'm doing paranormal stuff if you want to come through. And he rolls through. He gets in the box and he starts talking about days of the week. Doesn't know anything about the show that I'm about to go record. Starts talking about days of the week. Mentions the specific days right before we shoot. And says talking about making content, and then he name drops my two friends who I stayed with in Tennessee. He doesn't know these people. He doesn't know. So stuff like that comes out of it, and I'm like, all right, that's such a clear to me sign that like something's here, and we're poking at it, and it's poking back, and I adore that kind of stuff.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, what's your favorite haunted place in New York City? You say I know 12 would be, but
yeah, I really like 12 Gay Street. I went to McCarren Park recently. I went to McCarren and we did. I was reading something about the pool, McCarren Pool being haunted, and that one's really fascinating to me too because I feel like I like a place where the mythology does border on apocryphal. I like a place where it's really hard to pin down like what actually happened and what sort of just folk tales. And I also really like how public it is. I think that when people think about investigating haunted places, people always sort of imagine, like a house on a hill and you gotta go through a windy forest to get it. But what I like a public park because you're dealing with so much energy and so many people around. And I think there's something about so much living energy being in a place that you're trying to communicate with things that are maybe not living or beyond that really adds to the experience. Maybe it's not as spooky and scary as someone might want, but I think in terms of investigating it, you get some really interesting results.
And what happened at the park? What was your analysis?
So my analysis, what it felt like, and this has happened a couple of times with me at different old military bases that have sort of been reclaimed by nature. What I felt like we made contact with, it felt very playful. That's a consistent one for me. I feel like a lot of times when I'm interacting, I think if you're open to it, it feels very playful a lot of times. what I felt like we were communicating with was less of any specific spirit of a person and more the sort of the general sort of what the people of Liminal Earth, I don't know if you know Liminal Earth, really cool group out of the Pacific Northwest,
Mhm.
but what they would call the liminal spirit, and that is sort of the collective energy embodied and given form and given sort of personality of a place.
Mm.
And so that's really what it felt like we were talking to at McCarren Park. There were a couple of points where it specifically told us to go to a set of steps, and so that's someone in the SS method saying this and respond like, do you want us to move? And it says yes, and you say
Wow.
where, and it says steps, and you say, all right, yeah, we'll take the direction. Um, we like to start our investigations before we get into anything, even like SS. We like to do a tarot spread first. So we pull some cards, we ask some general questions, we ask about what we should be looking for, and then there's an oracle deck that I've got grabbing. It's called the Memento Mori Oracle deck,
Oh,
and
beautiful.
it's sort
Mhm.
of it's the cards are really nice. I got this one on Etsy, but the
Mhm.
cards are just really sort of beautiful art, and it is sort of designed with paranormal investigation stuff in mind. And so it gives you really sort of it gives you directions to ask questions for, and so that sort of really steered us towards this idea that like we're talking to something and we just had to be sort of open to it. So I think in terms of like one of my favorite places to investigate, it is definitely McCarren Park in New York City.
Interesting. I meant to ask you, 12 Gay Street, is it a private
Yeah.
residence? No? Okay.
So I think that it was. I think that it was I know it was a private residence at some point. There's private residences around it. It's very close to Stonewall, which again, a very sort of a
Mhm.
historic queer spot for me. And even just even just the playfulness of me not knowing the street and it being 12 Gay Street, gay being the name, just feels very
Right.
on the nose, very like
Mhm.
celebratory in a way. I sort of, and this is sort of what the pilot that I shot is about, but I think that there is a lot sort of intrinsically tied between queer identity worldwide and the paranormal and the strange. And I think that there's elements of marginalization and liminality that are sort of really intrinsically connected. And so that's generally what the direction that I'm moving when I'm talking to anything or
Mhm.
trying to make contact with anything. Um, so yeah, I do think it's a private residence, but at least when we were there, it looked like construction empty.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's an interesting theory, though. You
yeah.
living, in a liminal space, so to speak, and then, you know, that's where the contact is made in the fringes of. That's interesting. And plus, you have to be very empathetic. You have to be an empath, to be able to
Sure, yeah.
see some of these energies, right? Be very sensitive and.
Absolutely.
Um,
Also, I think there's something about living in a society that tells you you're bad
mhm,
just for existing and just sort of being what you are that makes you maybe
right.
a little bit more empathetic to the idea of, oh, this is a dangerous thing.
Right.
This idea of danger. And that's not to say there's not dangerous energies out there. I fully believe that. But I
Mm.
do think a lot of stuff gets categorized as dangerous or bad. And I think, we're still living in a satanic panic in a lot of
Mhm,
ways. And we're
mhm.
still living in an era where anything that doesn't sort of fit cleanly and neatly into a Christian ideology gets considered dangerous. And I
Right.
and I think that sort of reaching out, I think a lot of ghost shows I see are about going in and really catching it on camera and revealing it and getting talking about these evil things. And I'm
Mhm.
I'm saying I'm not convinced there's as much evil out there in old houses and basements and castles and stuff as people
Right.
seem to want there to be at the very least.
Sure. Yeah, I think just the actual paranormal frightens some people, right?
Absolutely.
Or
Absolutely.
may be actually, it could be a blessing, could be something positive,
Yeah.
people who go to Sedona and they see maybe an apparition, some may see that as dangerous, others may see it as, some kind of positive thing, you know?
I think about that with ideas of the Fae a lot. I get really
Mhm.
sort of amped about ideas of the Fae, and I think you hear all the time like, oh, it's dangerous, or oh, it's you can't trust them, and it's all this stuff, and it's like, I don't know. As a queer American, people say that about me all the time. You know,
Right.
I had a really wild one happen where the other day, and I love appearing objects. I love objects that just
Mhm.
I love all the stories and stuff. And I had my first one that I was aware of, at least, where in the middle of my floor, a bell, just a little bell, just shows up out of the blue. Not from anything. I've never seen a
Wow.
bell like this in the past. It's just there, just in the middle of the floor. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that feels like face stuff. Like that's wild. That's exciting. And I post about it online, and this
Hmm.
person I know pops in and is like, "You got to go bury that in the woods," and you say out loud like, I don't accept any deal that you're offering." And I was like, "All right, well, probably not going to bury it in the woods. That seems a little that seems a little overblown to me." And I think there's this sort of this instinct to distrust anything that we don't fully understand, and at least as it comes to exploring the weird and the strange, I'd rather I'd rather try to understand something before I decide if I want to trust it or not.
Sure. So you're talking, it was a physical bell you found.
I got it right here if you
Wow.
want to see it.
That's amazing.
It's I actually did I used some armature wire to make a little to make a little
Wow.
holding in place for it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it just
Looks like a
appeared just on the floor.
little offering to you. Yeah. Wow.
That's kind of what it felt like. And
Sure.
every now and then I've put cream out. I've put a couple of little milk and honey on the outside just to sort of pay my respects
Sure.
to whatever exists around here. And I don't know. It didn't feel sinister, and it didn't feel like a trick or anything like that. And who knows, maybe it is, but it feels very. And also, just I feel like when I think about bells and what bells mean, I think about cleansing and clearing and sort of like
Yeah.
good energy. And so it felt nice. It felt like a nice little thing to me.
That's cool. Yeah, go with your feeling on that one. That's interesting. But have you had any frightening moments during the
Absolutely.
operations?
Yeah, and I feel like that's so much like, I've had moments out in the woods or in in an old base where I feel a presence of like I feel a presence. And this is someone I like animals a lot, and like sometimes you'll be in the woods, you'll see an animal, and you'll know this thing does not mean me harm, but at the same time, it's putting up a display to let me know that it can harm. You know what I mean? And that's not evil or bad. That's nature. And I feel like I've had stuff like that. We actually had a thing when we were shooting our show where where several venomous snakes actually sort of showed up out of the blue and
Wow.
just sort of hovered until we left, and they acted very much not the way that snakes behave, and that felt like a very clear sign. You see a snake and you think, all right, well, I'm a big creature, and there's a bunch of us. Snake, for the most part, going to run away, doesn't want to deal with you. But when a couple of them show up and they're just sort of like letting you know, like, hey, this is a line, and I say, all right, well, I'll respect that line because I have a lot of respect for both the woods and venomous snakes. But I would say the scariest one was also on that investigation when we were out there shooting for the show. We were in an old town museum. We were in the museum of a town, and this is a town population 200, right? Something small. Like really, it's not a big. So it's in the town museum, and I'm plugged into the Estes method, and I'm responding, and I start giving directions to the people who are I can't see them because I got the blindfold, the headphones, but I start saying like get on the ground, and then talking about like your freedom is gone, stuff like this. And what's wild about it is it felt this is one of the only times when I've really felt like I am in direct communication with the spirit of a deceased person, and that person is very cruel and commanding. And I felt
Wow.
it from the tip of my head
Mm.
to the bottom of my feet. I felt this sense of dread all for my whole body. I just felt bad and
Mm.
wrong, and this sense of like feeling incorrect about that. So I think the dread that I experienced there as I was, sort of giving commands and people were responding and it was responding back to them, that's probably the scariest one that I've had
Mm.
personally. And that's just from the internal sense of like crawling out of my skin, feeling wrong about just being there.
Interesting. And how do you usually cleanse yourself after these events? Do you use salt and water, or you do?
Yeah, so we do a lot of when we begin an investigation, we will make a statement of purpose and we'll sort of explain that like we're here in a sense of excitement and curiosity, and we set a clear boundary of we are coming into this space, and when we leave, we're leaving this space, and nothing can join us, nothing can come with us. We make another statement of purpose sort of at the end. I like I've usually got a ring or a necklace with different gems like I'm terrible with specifics, but the shiny black stone that is sort of
Onyx?
a onyx, I think
Mm.
onyx for protection, other
Yeah.
stuff for
Mhm.
grounding. So we go into it. Oftentimes we'll use a different sort of. I really like fresh rosemary. I like to burn a little bit of fresh rosemary sometimes, and just sort of like exist in that smoke. Obviously, I don't. I encourage people, to think about the practice of, whether or not they're doing sort of appropriative practices with smudging or different things like that, and encourage people to listen to indigenous practitioners and not just sort of go out and buy whatever and use whatever. But I like rosemary a lot because it's not part of a protected practice, and also is not endangered. That's another big thing. Is I think both Palo Santo and white sage are both being over harvested, and there's a lot of stuff there. So I think that there's good ways to sort of cleanse and experience cleansing. Obviously, if I can just sort of get out and exist in the moonlight for a while, moonlight always feels like a good sort of refresh. But I think it's mostly intention. It's mostly the intention that I'm going into and leaving a space with. This idea of like we are intending to communicate but not carry, and talk but not bring anything back with us. And I think that's always sort of felt very that's always sort of felt very important to me, and very like and very much like sort of where I feel strength and protection.
Interesting. Um, I know, speaking of difficult places, the World
Yeah,
Trade Center, uh,
yeah,
having my office was there, and there's a lot of emotionality there, obviously, from what
absolutely.
happened. What's your opinion? I know I brought a shaman there once, a friend of mine,
Yeah,
Alex Stark, went down there and said that, he did a lot of work releasing some of the souls that were still stuck, who didn't
yeah,
even know that they had been what had happened. So a lot
of
of times,
course.
in tragedies, that's one of the problems, is that
Right.
some of the spirits don't know what happened. So have you done any work down at the World Trade Center?
I haven't done any work there. I think for me, I think when I'm hearing about how your office was there, that feels sort of very personal to you. I think it would be easier for me to go somewhere like that if I felt like I had that sort of personal anchor. But I feel like for me, as someone who's sort of disconnected from the place, it would feel, I don't know if I feel like it would be respectful of me specifically
Right.
because not feeling connected. But in terms of what I think about the space, I feel like even if there weren't a single ghost, and that's not what I'm saying, I think, but even if there weren't a single ghost, the fact that that place is such a focal point of pain and
Mm.
sorrow, and
Sure,
just
yeah.
so collective, not just of a city, but of so many people. I think that place is gonna experience a lot of energy. And what that energy does, I don't know. I don't know how that energy manifests or what it looks like. But as a person who believes in a lot, again, intent and energy and sort of stuff like that, I think it's got to be something. So I would be deeply surprised if there weren't something strange, if there weren't something sort of beyond what we would call the physical natural world going on there. I can't, not from experience. That's just a guess for me. But yeah, I don't claim to know specifically what's going on, but I think it would be very hard for a place like that not to have at least something going on.
Yeah, and that was Alex Stark's opinion as well. He said they should have cleared it before they rebuilt.
Yeah, that makes
That new
sense.
building isn't doing well. I mean, I worked in there briefly as
Sure.
well, the new building, and there's a
Yeah,
lot of strange energy there. A lot. The elevators
that makes
malfunction.
sense. Yeah.
I remember one time uh there was a water break, main break or something, but water came. It's like something from The Shining, The elevator
Yeah, of
opened, water
course.
came, and it was just a
Oof.
creepy building.
Yeah,
And
of course.
maybe they should have just kept it as a monument or something like that. That's sort of my personal opinion, but I could be
Totally.
wrong.
Yeah, I don't know that there's
Yeah,
a building there. I think sometimes you can let a tragic thing be. Definitely.
yeah, like let the so I think this healing still needs to be done, but I tend to avoid it because of the emotionality. So if I'm ever
Of
in that
course.
area, I don't like walking through that where the buildings used to be.
Yeah.
So, but interesting. But like I say, it's I think there are people going down there still doing some type of clearing work.
Yeah. I
Mm.
think that stuff like that I think that stuff like that, especially for people who feel connected, I think that can be clearing work that has an effect on a place, and I think it can be clearing work that has an effect on a person. I think if someone
Right.
feels personally connected to it going in, I think in a lot of ways, confronting one's own trauma about things like that too can also be really resonant and valuable for people as well.
So that brings us to the concept of exorcisms of ghosts.
Yeah.
Um, I had a friend who did paranormal investigations in Los Angeles, and she was often called to places. And like, for instance, a restaurant would want,
Right.
say, okay, there's this, the people are seeing a guy at a table every day. What is it? And she
Yeah.
did an investigation using the box and all that. And she
Yeah.
says it's a former client or a former owner.
Right.
And the owner of the bar say, okay, don't get rid of him. It
Yeah.
becomes sort of a, it becomes
It's
sort of
part
a,
of it.
yeah, it's become sort of like an attraction. And also it's part of the energy of the place in a way. So they
Absolutely.
let the spirits stay. And it's almost like an imprint. Like we talked
Yeah.
before the show, it's almost like autoplay. Um,
Yeah.
I had that experience when I lived in actually, I'm going to say a haunted house in Alexandria,
Cool.
Virginia. It's an old
Yeah.
house,
Of
but I
course.
would wake up sometimes in a hypnagogic zone, sleep paralysis,
Yeah.
and I could see a woman, and it happened every night. The woman would come
Yeah.
walking down the stairs, but it was almost
Wow.
like it was taped, like it was an old
Yeah.
tape reel, and she'd do the same
Absolutely.
thing every day. It was some kind of energy. One
Yeah.
time though, when I did wake up, I did get attacked. I mean,
Wow.
you could say it's a dream, whatever, a waking dream, but
Sure.
but it was a male. It must have been her husband. But I'm
Interesting.
guessing these are people that lived there before.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But we also had instances waking up at 3:30 in the morning with someone dragging heavy things in the attic.
Wow.
Because the
Yeah.
attic, there was no room to move.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was one of the things you learn to live with. But
Of
my question
course.
to you is, have you ever been called to exercise a place of a ghost?
I haven't been called to do any
Mhm.
exorcisms myself, and I wouldn't feel personally qualified to try to remove a presence from a place. I think exorcism is a tricky one because I think that the practice of exorcism. I was actually just reading a really interesting thing about how sort of old school Jewish mysticism
Hmm.
would use the idea of the exorcism, and sort of the interesting sort of, and this is like pre Catholic exorcism, and that's a whole thing. We'll get to that, but I think this idea of an exorcism, the way that it sort of functioned, being sort of tied to the concepts of therapy and tied to the concepts of trying to not grab something and rip it out of someone and throw it in the trash or whatever, but instead to talk to someone and talk to someone to get whatever is afflicting them to leave, and to get whatever is afflicting them to bargain, and to sort of make peace. And I think that that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I think, for as much as I love the film The Exorcist, a great film, a
Right.
delightful, a delightful, wonderful movie, I do think that it has done a lot to culture in terms of what people think. Like, haunting, bad thing. We got to get a priest in there to
Right.
do the whole thing. And the Catholic exorcism is its whole thing that I think takes the church and getting approval from a number of people and all this stuff. But you look at a lot of ghost hunting TV shows, and there's a lot of times it's like, all right, well, we got to get the stakes up a little bit, bring in an exorcist, and have them do
Right.
something wild. And I just personally, we talked a little about the satanic panic stuff before, but I think that plays into it in a big way, where people think something is bad and something is harmful, and I gotta get a priest in here to help. And I don't personally, I'm not saying I don't think it works, but I am saying I'm not wild about that as the go-to solution for everything. There's a ghost show called Kindred Spirits, that treats hauntings and lingering presences and specters and sort of spirits not as a pest to be removed, but as something to understand and potentially appease and to sort of make peace with. So it's not, it's not to clear out a bunch of, like, we're not the Ghostbusters, I
Right.
think, but it's the idea that something is here, some sort of presence, whether it's an echo of a person or whether it's that person's consciousness beyond life. But that whatever that is thinks that it lives here and thinks that it belongs here. And so how do you make peace with something like that? How do you find a way to say, like, hey, I'm not going to try to stop you from being here, but I live here as a living being, and how do we come to terms with each other? And I think there's something that I really like about that approach. This idea of not trying to assert dominance or ownership over something just because we can't understand it or maybe it scares us at first. But to say, like, and I like the idea of leaving the restaurant ghost. I would make me want to go to that restaurant. I think that's great.
Right.
But outside of the idea that it's a draw and it makes people get excited about checking something out. But even just, I don't think personally, anytime I've been somewhere very spooky, specifically is probably the place I've been the most often was a hotel in Arcata, California that I used to stay at. There was a festival in this town, and I always stayed in this one hotel, and the hotel felt incredibly haunted.
Hmm.
And I think part of it, when you're in a hotel, I think it's easier to be like, this is temporary. This is not my space. This is their space. This is the place that I am just visiting. And I think, but applying that to anything, right? We exist. To quote John E.L. Tenney, one of my favorite minds and speakers and writers about the strange. We exist, between being born and dying. That's a temporary space that we exist in from one point to another. And after that, others, this is not a quote. This is me just sort of summarizing ideas. I know I said the quote, and then usually traditionally people follow that up with a quote, and I'm breaking tradition by that. Basically, I think that Tenny talks a lot about, life itself is sort of a temporary experience,
Mhm.
and that I really fixated on that because to me I think about, who knows where I will be when this body is gone. Who knows where I will sort of, who knows if there's parts of me that stay places and other parts of me that move on to something. I know a friend of mine who thinks that the human soul sort of splits into many pieces, and
Hmm.
each one sort of does different things, and some end up in an afterlife, and some end up on the earthly plane, and some move on to another thing. I love that. I don't know how much I understand it, but I think it's a great concept. Um, I don't know. I think I would hope that whatever parts of me living humans in the future engage with, they would do so respectfully and sort of acknowledging that I too am a thing. And that's when I think about trying to remove ghosts from a place, I have to wonder, like, why? If it's
Yeah.
hurting someone, then sure, that's something that we can talk about and we can figure out ways to avoid that. But in general, like, I don't feel, if we acknowledge that there is a spiritual presence in a place, then what gives us more of a claim to that place than whatever that spiritual presence is?
I agree. I think it's almost like it's a Western concept though. The whole
Yes,
emphasis on
absolutely.
it. So it reminds me of some of these, the dudes that, every 5 minutes they're putting the antibacterial stuff in their hands, and
Yeah, sure.
like people that go overseas, the same thing. They want to wash the, whatever overseas. It's
Totally.
almost like I'm not gonna say colonialist mindset, but like a Western
No,
sort of
I,
let's
I think it
them and
is though.
us,
I think you're
let's
right.
clean. Uh, But then you go to, like, for instance, I spent a lot of time in Egypt, but you go to a
Yeah,
place like Egypt where it's understood that there's jinn and there's ghosts everywhere, right?
yeah,
And the
totally.
magicians there, when they start a magical, operation, they call it seher.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
first thing they do is they warn other spirits in the house, "Hey, we're about to do a,
I
investigation. We're not
love
kicking
that.
you out. You
Yeah,
guys can stay, just don't cause a problem." So in other words,
yeah, I
they
love that.
live with all the ghosts, and I think that's
Yeah,
what makes Egypt in places like that is so powerful, because I mean you can
sure.
feel that
Yeah,
you're living among spirits, and that are sort of
yeah,
welcome, and they hang out with you. But when we come to the United States, it's like, oh my God, there's a ghost. Let's get rid of it, and we'll call the priest. And,
absolutely.
you
Yeah,
know, but I think there are areas like Sedona, where I just was, where
yeah.
that's the paranormal sort of welcome, like the spiritual world is welcome, and it's not seen as frightening. But anyway, I think you have the same attitude, in your work,
I'm
right? So
trying to. I try to.
yeah,
I try to be. I try to be respectful of. I try to be respectful of just about anyone until they make it very clear that they're not going to be respectful to me, and
right,
then we'll figure it. Then we'll figure it out when we get there. But and
yeah,
that's not just the spiritual world too. That's people. That's everyone. I think I spent I spent a decade as a touring performer
oh,
and doing stand up all over this country.
hmm,
And I think I'm from San Francisco originally, and it's so easy to have this idea that everything is dangerous. Everything out there, there's danger. And I'm not saying that there isn't. Danger is just
oh,
about anyone.
absolutely.
I
Mhm.
don't think that it's any more present in some places than it is in the city. People, I think in the city, you get this feeling of like, I'm in a city, I'm safe, I'm in a box, I'm good. But I think that there is danger, but also there's beauty and there's love and there's all sorts of stuff all over the world. And all over, I think that the world is full of people who you might think like that person presents a danger to me because I don't understand what their whole deal is. And I think that the more you give yourself the chance to meet a person and to talk to a person and sort of figure out what their whole deal is, you say, oh no, that's just a person doing their thing. And I think I'm specifically thinking about how I think a lot of people in cities, especially northern cities, think about the South. I was terrified of the South for so long because,
Mhm.
I'm queer and I'm mixed race and I have all these things where I'm like, you think like, oh, you're not safe there. I've Memphis, Tennessee is one of my favorite cities in the whole country. That's one of my absolute most favorite places to be. Some of the people I cherish and love the most in my whole life are out in Memphis. And I think really spending time there, spending time in Atlanta, spending time in the Carolinas, I think you realize like, yes, there are people with very bad politics in these places. I'm not going to pretend that they're not. And there's people who, have bad politics to the degree that they'll hurt someone else. That's true. But also there is, really cool, thriving, vibrant, queer communities, people of color who are existing and making art and just sort of having lives, right? And I think it's really easy to forget that there's everybody everywhere, you know? And I think, I know you kind of joked about calling it a colonial mindset, but I think it is. I think it absolutely is this idea that whatever I don't understand, I must destroy and claim. And I
Right.
think that's not good for the living or the dead,
Yeah.
personally.
Interesting. Yeah, it's good. So what is next for Psychic Friends? I know you're doing a pilot for a show, and
Yeah, so this weekend, I'm not sure when this episode's going live. This weekend, we are going to be at something called Pan Paracon. That's the Pandemic Paranormal Convention. It's an all online
oh,
series of panels and stuff.
okay.
Panparacon.com. Really great people on there. I've got some great friends doing panels. People who've written cool books. My friend Mortellus, author of Do I Have to Wear Black? It's sort of a really cool book about necromancy.
Mhm.
My friend Alex Matsuo, who's written a cool book about some spooky haunted experiences. A lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool people. So we're doing that. And then, yeah, the show that we shot, I'm very, very excited about. Again, I try not to say too much, and I know that sounds teasy or whatever, but I'm so excited about it. It's getting edited right now, it's getting produced, and then I really genuinely believe when people get a chance to see this, I think it's gonna really open up some minds about a side of paranormal stuff that I don't think anybody's really talked about. And I'm so excited for people to be able to see what we've been cooking up.
And that's great. And where can people see that?
So that one is not that one's the I can't talk too much about the
Okay.
details of exactly where it's landed or anything like that, but it is being worked on and when it is in the world, when it's out in the world, I will not be able to shut up about it.
Oh,
So
well,
it'll
look
be
forward to
yeah,
that, definitely. And for someone who wants
yeah,
to get involved in sort of ghost explorations, you mentioned
yeah.
having like the essential tools would be, you mentioned the box, the sound box.
I like a
Yeah.
spirit box. Spirit
Okay.
box. The S. There's a new one that's out that I haven't played around with yet. I like an SB7. The spirit box you can find in a lot of different places. If you want to get a proper Estes method going, I'd also recommend a pair of Vic Firth isolation headphones.
Mhm.
Um, I got very excited and I bought a an old school tape recorder because I was talking to Tenny
Oh,
about it, and Tenny was explaining to me that the science of EVP was sort of decided on tape recording and the magnetic stuff, and not digital recorders. Not to say digital recorders don't work, but to say that there's something very interesting and specific about a tape recorder which you can get for 12, $15.
wow.
Um, but I think if someone wants to get into it, I really I don't think that there's a wrong way to start. I would say pick out a couple of investigation methods just from shows that you like or books that you've read or things that are interesting and things that seem like something you want to try. Figure out your own comfort level. In paranormal investigation, I think is always more fun if you're doing it with a couple of people who you have a
Yeah.
fun time spending time with.
Mhm.
So, get a little crew together and just try it. You can bring a tarot deck out spooky place and try to talk to something with that. You can bring an oracle deck. You could bring a pendulum.
Mhm.
You can bring anything out
Right.
that gives something the ability to sort of talk to you and
Mhm.
engage with you. And you can, I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of wrong ways to do it, but in terms
Sure.
of the basic
Yeah.
stuff,
Sure. People have done it the wrong way too. So, but yeah,
yeah,
it's great.
absolutely.
I look forward to seeing your new project, and definitely.
I'll definitely send you information about it as it's coming out.